Welcome all to Subterra's third webinar. We are talking today about unlocking rooftop potential and efficiency gains with geothermal energy supply systems. Very excited to present our panel today, our panel of experts that will be chatting about the exciting efficiencies that can be gained, especially with your developments by going geothermal energy, geothermal exchange heating and cooling. And with that, for our agenda for today, we have David MacMillan from the City of Toronto, who is going to be talking about zoning bylaws. We have Hanieh Momeni from BDP Quadrangle talking about repurposing the mechanical penthouse. And I, Kareem Mirza from Subterra, will be your host and moderator. We'll be talking about how we are building green and the value that we are adding to buildings by moving their heating and cooling loads to fully green geothermal. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce to you David MacMillan from the City of Toronto. He's the program manager at the City of Toronto. And without taking anything away from what he's about to talk about, I'd like to pass it on to David.
Thanks, Kareem. So hi, everybody. I'm going to start with some context for why we are looking at Geo-exchange as a solution to help us achieve our climate goals at the city. And then I'll come back at the end with some discussion about specific zoning bylaw provisions to help enable this idea of repurposing mechanical penthouse space. So next slide, please. So repurposing mechanical penthouse space in a meme format is basically this idea that zoning bylaws can help add additional value to a geo-exchange project by essentially reusing that saved space. So it's a great win-win in our opinion. And but zoning bylaws can be pretty technical, so I'll cover some of the details that will matter if you're looking at this as an opportunity. Next, please. So Transform Geo, you may have heard of it. It's our climate plan, essentially, City of Toronto's climate plan. And our goal is to hit net zero emissions by 2040. In simple terms, what that means is coupling heat pumps to low carbon energy sources, for example, the earth with geo-exchange. So it's essentially electrification. And that means, obviously, of course, working with Toronto Hydro on the electrical grid, and then advocating to the province to, make sure that the bulk grid stays clean so we can achieve our objectives. And the graphs you see there basically are the trajectory we're on and where we need to get to. And it's a big task, and we're going to need solutions like Geo-exchange to help us get there. Next slide. So just some context, in Ontario, thermal energy is not regulated, unlike electricity and gas. The city does not have the authority to mandate connection on private properties. And so our approach is sort of threefold. We set strong green building standards through planning policy, which I'll get to. We lead by example. The city does own and control assets. And so we use those, we leverage those for climate action. And then recognizing that the private sector, our partners, play a big role in scaling up activity, we find ways to encourage, incentivize, and enable them to do their job. So it's, again, a nice synergy. Next slide. So in terms of planning approval requirements, really where we see applications are at two stages, at a rezoning and site plan. So at a rezoning stage, really what we're asking applicants to do is to screen opportunities for low carbon energy sources, including geo-exchange. If they're of a certain scale, 100,000 square meters or more, we ask for engagement with district energy developers, because that seems to be around the spot, around the scale where it makes sense. And then we encourage certain things to future-proof the building if you're not ready to make that move yet. The idea, for example, of low temperature distribution and mechanical designs that kind of enable retrofits in the future. But then at site plan, really where the rubber hits the road is with the Toronto Green Standard, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. But in case you're not, what you see on the right there is sort of how we get to net zero by 2028. It was recently accelerated from 2030. And the TGS is what does that. It sets certain requirements, which are prescribed in tier 1, the minimum. And then we have voluntary higher tiers that come with an incentive. Ultimately, it means net zero by 2028 for the industry, and it's already net zero for city buildings today, which is something else we work on. Next slide. again, probably something you're seeing. Geo-exchange, we're seeing a lot of popularity because if you look at the graph on the left of the table on the left, this path to Geo-exchange is a very easy way to meet the greenhouse gas intensity and the energy intensity targets in the TGS. So it's very popular because it requires very little additional work to the building to meet the, let's say, the minimum requirements. Of course, if you're going for the higher tiers, you do have to do envelope upgrades and other details will matter to get there. But we see Geo-exchange increasing in popularity because of its simplicity, especially with the energy developer business model. At the top in the chart there, it's a bit up and down, but we're starting to see a trend of more and more Geo-exchange. And if I had the updated figures for 2023, you'd see a lot more proposals with Geo-exchange. This was very early in the year. It was only after reviewing 4 projects. But by the end of this year, you'll see a lot more because of the how effective it can be meeting the Toronto Green Standard. Next slide. So leading by example is really an important part of what we do. In addition to Geo-exchange projects at our buildings, we do things that are sort of first of their kind, at least for us. So we did a district energy system at Exhibition Place with future plans to decarbonize. We did the first lake-based heat exchange near the Waterfront Neighborhood Center, and we are currently supporting a company doing the first wastewater energy project in Toronto. These are ways in which we can sort of lead by example to make it easier for the industry then to come in and scale this up. Next slide. Sometimes that means just providing information as well. So the map you see on the right there is the map of our trunk sewer network with sort of the estimated heat that's available in those sewers. And this is available through a website and interactive website on the city's webpage on the city's website, where you can go and sort of find out what is available nearby and screen for opportunities. We're working on others, including expansion of deep geothermal as well. Basically, where it's not a physical asset, we can provide information to help reduce the sort of the barrier to entry. Yeah, so next slide, please. And then, ultimately, there is a cost premium to doing some of these things to meet the higher tiers of the green standard. So that is something we are going to address. We already are, and Hanieh will get into what that means in terms of repurposing Penthouse space. But what I wanted to point out is that the development charge refund, the incentive for meeting the higher tiers of the TGS recently increased quite substantially. And so the city is trying to find ways to reduce the cost pain that you would experience to try and achieve these objectives. And we're always looking at other ways to do this because this is a really important goal for us. And we know that you require some help. So that's something we're always cognizant of.
Thank you, David. So without further ado, just wanted to introduce Hanieh Momeni from BDP Quadrangle. Hanieh, over to you.
Thank you, Kareem. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to cover the topic of how you can unlock net saleable space on the roof by using Geo-exch. Just a quick introduction to BDP Quadrangle. BDP Quadrangle is the North American division of the global architectural and design firm BDP. Our expertise extends across a spectrum of architectural projects, mixed-use residential, workplace, retail, transit, media, education, and healthcare sectors. Our Toronto studio in particular specializes in multifamily residential developments. Next slide, please. And a little bit about myself. I'm a senior architect leading several residential projects. I'm part of the BDP Quadrangle Green Team, and what we do is we mentor project leads through their design process, giving them tools and advice on how the projects could be designed more energy efficient and sustainable. Also, I recently earned my certification as a passive house designer. And put it simply, it means I'm fully committed to sustainable building design. Next, please. In the realm of architectural design, one of the persistent challenges we face is the negotiation process with some developers regarding the integration of sustainability goals and the implementation of energy efficient solutions within a project. These challenges come from several factors which are understandable. Developers often raise concerns about the initial costs associated with incorporating sustainability and energy efficient solutions into a project. They may worry that these features will require additional upfront investment, potentially impacting the project's budget. Some developers and architects might have different priorities when it comes to returns on investments. Developers driven by immediate financial returns may lean towards more conventional and cost-effective construction methods. Architects and other stakeholders, on the other hand, emphasize the long-term benefits of sustainability, such as reduced operational costs and enhanced property value. The choice often depends on the nature of the project and the stakeholders' perspectives. Developers may question whether there is a sufficient market demand for sustainable features and whether these features genuinely impact property values. Understanding and accurately assessing the market appetite for sustainable features can be a critical factor in decision making. Meeting building codes and regulation is already a complex task in construction projects. Adding sustainability goals on top of it can be seen as an additional challenge as it requires a deeper level of understanding and effort to ensure compliance with green building standards. Some developers may not fully grasp the potential benefits of sustainability, either due to limited awareness or experience in implementing sustainable practices. This lack of awareness can hinder their willingness to embrace sustainable features in their projects. And there may be perceptions within the development community that sustainable features are unproven or risky. Developers might hesitate to adopt new and innovative sustainability technologies or practices, fearing potential setbacks or uncertainties in project outcomes. In navigating these challenges, architects often play a crucial role in presenting compelling arguments, data, and case studies to show the long-term advantages of sustainability. Successful negotiation involves finding a balance between financial objectives and sustainability goals while addressing these understandable concerns raised by developers. Next, please. So the goal is to promote the construction of low carbon buildings and allow developers to utilize the mechanical penthouse floor for a more optimal space, such as an amenity or a residential unit. And we are aware that the low carbon heating and cooling systems, including geothermal, can greatly reduce the required rooftop mechanical equipment. By utilizing geothermal systems, we can efficiently provide heating and cooling without the need for extensive rooftop equipment like traditional HVAC systems and cooling towers. Geothermal systems are compact and can significantly reduce the space required for mechanical infrastructure. This reduction in rooftop mechanical equipment not only optimizes the use of space, but also enhances the building's aesthetics and overall environmental performance. Next slide, please. So during the planning application, it's common practice to allocate a significant portion of the rooftop space for mechanical equipment. This allocation typically ranging from 5 to 15 meters in height above the last occupied floor, and the mechanical penthouse mass needs to stay within the angular plane of the project, which accounts for the installation of various systems such as HVAC, elevators, and utility infrastructure. This reserved space ensures that the building's essential services are accommodated while keeping them out of sight from the occupants. However, this allocation can be a significant limitation in maximizing the usable space or aesthetic potential of the rooftop. Next, please. For making the proposal feasible, we must fulfill a few prerequisites during the zoning process. To accommodate a mix of residential, commercial, or amenity spaces within the mechanical penthouse level, access to the elevators and other structure might be needed from the mechanical penthouse level. Therefore, in the zoning application, additional height projection from the mechanical penthouse should be considered. The site-specific bylaw should consider GFA flexibility for the site, either by establishing a maximum GFA or by exempting specific uses from GFA calculations, such as more than 2 square meters per unit for the amenities, which is specified in Toronto bylaw. Securing building height through zoning bylaws as an absolute metric measurement is vital. This approach grants builders the flexibility to include residential, commercial, or amenity spaces within the mechanical penthouse level, regardless of the number of stories. By specifying a precise height limit in zoning regulation, we ensure versatile design possibilities while maintaining compliance with zoning standards. The core objective here revolves around optimizing the use of the existing building envelope without making any increases in height. In other words, our aim is to make the best possible use of the space already allocated within the building's limitation. Next, please. So the intended result of using low carbon heating and cooling system is that the development would be able to pursue higher TGS performance and contribute to TGS goals for emissions reduction and energy efficiency. Also, geothermal provides a reliable and renewable heating and cooling solution that significantly reduces a building's reliance on carbon-intensive energy sources, which aligns with the city's climate action strategy. And last but not least, by using geothermal, fewer mechanical systems are needed, and you are able to free up space in the mechanical penthouse level. And this allows for the creation of additional residential units. This approach maximizes the use of available space and contributes to the city's efforts to meet the housing needs. Next, please. In addressing the challenges that we face in our negotiation, we prioritize showcasing long-term benefits, and we try to propose win-win solutions. We propose that by investing in energy efficient system upfront, you could reduce long-term operational costs, which would really work with the rental purpose buildings or commercial buildings. Also, by eliminating unnecessary mechanical space and cooling towers, you could enhance revenue potential and building functionality by adding additional residential units or leasable space. Our design aims for outstanding environmental performance, including significant carbon reductions. This will align with the TGS and Transform TO goals for emission reduction. By meeting energy standards and gaining municipal support, we could simplify project approvals. We could explore leasing energy, which may provide additional income streams. And lastly, identifying sustainable investment options, such as tax incentives and green financing, which ensures lasting financial benefits. So here I will be showcasing two of our office projects. The first one is the Bata Shoe Factory in partnership with Double Dam Architecture, which has been repurposed into a rental property. Construction was completed in 2019, featuring geothermal heating and cooling, along with an additional rooftop space transformed into a stylish lounge and outdoor amenity area next to it. Next, please. Another exciting project that is under construction is Old Bronte Road. As you can see, we've taken advantage of the rooftop space to create a practical outdoor amenity area. This project will also operate with geothermal. We're excited about the possibilities for future projects that can follow a similar path, which is repurposing mechanical penthouse space through the use of low-carbon mechanical systems and freeing up valuable rooftop spaces. Next, please. So the next steps for the developers would be coordinating a meeting with the consultant team to assess site potential and the benefits of repurposing mechanical penthouse space. Reach out to an energy provider to advise on low carbon heating and cooling technologies. Coordinate a meeting with the consultant team, the selected energy provider, and relevant city staff to discuss next steps, reporting requirements, and timelines, and make sure to have an ongoing coordination from the beginning of the project to the completion. Now I pass it to David for the last part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Hanieh. So, we've done this in Toronto now several times in the last few months. To be clear, it's happened before, sort of by accident, where developers have been able to repurpose the mechanical penthouse. But what we've done now is working with city planning and our legal services division to formalize this, because until it's written down somewhere, it can be perceived as something risky or uncertain, given that there's much bigger issues as part of the planning process that developers are trying to solve. So listed there on the left are a few of the projects where they've already been essentially approved, at least at committee, if not council. And I'm going to walk through now the first one that we worked on, which is 25 St. Mary's Street. It's a two-tower development downtown, quite large, in the range of 60 stories, 1,300 units. So a very large proposal, but the process and the principles really are the same for the ones, whether it's a mid-rise or even a lower-rise building. So I'll walk through some of the details here. It's fairly technical, but yeah, happy to answer any questions at the end on the details. From the next slide, please. So really, this is just an overview of the process. So the first thing you want to do is, you come in with your application with let's say a conventional mechanical penthouse, because that's what establishes, the size of that mechanical penthouse. So when we say there, the finalize the building envelope, it's not actually, we're not talking about the energy sustainability envelope. We're talking about just the massing of the building. That's key, that it's sort of finalized first for city planning to review, because they need those dimensions. The second step, if not done already, you definitely want to talk to an energy service provider like a Subterra about, what would it look like to do geo-exchange in this building? Because those details, some of them matter very much for city planning to understand, so they can build it into the zoning bylaw. Then at that point, you do want to reinitiate the discussion with city planning, specifically about this idea of repurposing the mechanical penthouse space. Step 3 is really important because now there are documents, the documents you would submit as part of your typical rezoning would need to be revised to reflect this new, the use of geo-exchange and repurposing the penthouse space. So on the architecture side, obviously you need to say where the geoenergy system would be located, how much mechanical space are we talking about here? Obviously revised floor plans showing that space at the rooftop, and then anything below grade. So for example, if you have a parking garage, where would that additional mechanical space for the, the pumps, the manifolds, the additional equipment, where would that be located? Basically, the changes to the layout of the building need to be shown in drawings. An important one that might get overlooked is your functional servicing report. That essentially establishes, does the city have the capacity to serve this development of things like water or wastewater? The reason it matters is because if you're adding more units, the city needs to do the calculations to say that we have the capacity. Now, it's very unlikely you'd be in a situation where adding 1 or 2 units makes that difference. But we've worked on a couple of projects that have added 20 units. And so that can make a difference. And so your functional servicing report, you need to know you have that capacity before, you don't want to leave that till the end, basically, weeks away from committee. You want to get that done up front. And then there's some other things that would be tied to unit count that you would need to update. So things like, following the growing up guidelines or adding amenity space, there are ratios tied to unit counts that if you're going to add more units, you need to make sure those ratios are updated. And then finally, which I'll get into in the next slides, are the details in the zoning bylaw itself. Next slide, please. So there are 6 things that really matter for the zoning bylaw. An allowance clause, so simply to allow this idea of repurposing penthouse space, allowing geo-exchange. A maximum height, which, as Hanieh explained, is to the height of now what is another floor of the building, essentially, as defined by city planning. Same overall height, but we're saying it's to the top of what would have been the mechanical penthouse, instead of typically to the top of the last residential floor in a conventional setup. You need to permit certain projections to go beyond that height. And these are all the things that you would still need to operate the building. Antennas, elevator overruns, other kinds of equipment. You need to specify those. Obviously, now there's going to be a maximum gross floor area, including the additional gross floor area you're gaining from repurposing the mechanical penthouse. There's a definition for geo-energy. That's the definition in the city's bylaw. The term is kind of odd, but geo-energy means geo-exchange. So that needs to be in there. And then a change to an important diagram that shows now the finalized height. And I'll walk through these in detail next. Next slide. So this is the, very simply, an allowance clause basically says you can do a geo-energy facility in this building. Very straightforward. Geo-energy has a definition. It may be different in your jurisdiction if you're listening from another municipality, but we took our geo-energy definition from sort of the provincial legislation when there was a feed-in tariff program. They sort of define these different technologies. That's where it comes from. You could call it something else, but whatever it is, it needs to be clear to the zoning bylaw team what that means. Maximum height, as I said, now we're including the equipment used for the operation of the building. So conventionally, it's always written as exclusive of the mechanical penthouse. Now you're including it. So those extra few meters really matter. That's what that's the key to enabling this. Next slide. Projections. I won't go through all of them because it varies by building, but there are a number of things that would always project on the roof of a building. the key here is, so you're specifying all of these, and this is beyond. Now, it would not include, the essentially the penthouse, like the mechanical, the heating and cooling equipment, because that is defined in the maximum height in the previous clause. So these are all the other things that you need. An obvious one is an elevator overrun. If you are now putting units on that top floor, you need the elevator overrun to go beyond them, because unless they're 2-floor units, you're assuming that the elevator would need to go beyond those units. So that's an obvious example where there would still be some height above that, what is now a residential floor. Next slide. Maximum GFA, again, fairly self-explanatory. Whatever additional GFA you expect to get because of this, that would be your cap in the zoning bylaw. You don't have to use all of it, of course, but that's your limit. And planning does that as a way to, essentially say, it's not whatever you can do. This is what we've agreed as reasonable, and it's up to you to try and maximize that space. And then very simply, a definition clause, again, need to define geoenergy or other technologies for that matter, but geoenergy, again, was already in our zoning bylaw, the parent bylaw, and so we just went with that same definition. Next slide. And then this is the diagram 3 that I referenced, which is basically showing the height. That height there is now inclusive of what would have been the mechanical penthouse. It's now a residential floor. Typically, it would show, height and then MP plus mechanical penthouse, meaning it's excluded. But now the diagrams will look different because it's included, and that's important. So the height is technically the same as what it otherwise would have been because, again, in a conventional setup, the mechanical penthouse is excluded. One important distinction that shouldn't make a difference in your applications is that planning now counts it as a story. So an 8-story building becomes 9 stories, for example. But again, the height is the same in meters. Next slide. So this is the result of the 25 St. Mary precedent. To be clear, this is one level of the penthouse because it was a fairly large building with a very tall penthouse in a conventional setup. But just in this one level, they gained, I think, over 400 square meters of space from using Geo-exch. And so, like I said, we've seen applications from 2 to 20 units. And I mean, I won't say it's every application, but we've seen them almost 3,000 square meters of additional floor space. And so there's a lot of value there to be unlocked. And again, our point is to try and, make it easier to do Geo-exch to reduce that cost premium. But again, it's a win-win because these are housing units that we desperately need anyways. So next slide. So for our purposes, next steps, we are working on a sort of final template bylaw language, essentially, that can be plugged into any development application. Again, at rezoning, that's key. It needs to be done through the rezoning. And then, in the meantime, until we have that template language, of course, feel free to reach out to us. I put my colleague's contact there. He typically is sort of doing the intake for these files. And yeah, we'd be happy to sort of facilitate and help you if we can. And this is just our contact information, myself and Hanieh, so can, happy to follow up at any point with anybody if they have questions. Yeah, I think back to you now, Kareem.
David, thank you very much. Hanieh, thank you very much. Absolutely wonderful presentations, tons of information, and I can already see some of the questions coming in. So folks, please submit more now or afterwards. I'm going to go through a few slides to explain what Subterra does, just a reminder to those who already know, and a fresh information for those who don't. But we will be spending quite a bit of time on Q&A, so please feel free to continue to post your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. So in the way of a quick introduction to Subterra, we are the largest fully vertically integrated geothermal heating and cooling utility in Canada and the USA. We have 66 drilling rigs in our fleet. By the end of the year, we will have over 100. We have over 250 employees, ranging from drill operators, field engineers, mechanical engineers, energy modelers, financial modeling experts, asset managers, operations and maintenance providers, and project managers. We are vertically integrated for a reason. We want the path to net zero to be without resistance. We do not interfere with the new development's critical path. We can commit to timelines because we own the rigs, and we confidently guarantee that the operations of the project for their entire lifespan will be our responsibility, because we are geothermal energy heating and cooling experts. As North America's premier distributed geothermal heating and cooling utility, we deliver clean, renewable heating and cooling to our customers. Next. Just a few slides, a few photographs over here from one of our larger, most recent projects. But as you can see, we have various means by which to go ahead and approach any kind of condition from a drilling perspective. We have 5 different types of rigs in our fleet, and we can be anywhere in continental US or Canada within 2 days to perform our services. Next. Our standard offering, which you heard me refer to as our utility offering, is effectively energy as a service. We are responsible for all of the upfront costs associated with the geothermal heating and cooling utility. And we are also responsible on an ongoing basis for ensuring that that cost remains below the conventional cost of heating and cooling. We are responsible for the ongoing operations of the unit, and we take on the necessary guarantees and liabilities associated with it. We also are very creative in how we structure our financial offering, and we allow for a joint ownership in our utilities as well, for those who would like to continue to have a seat at the table and would otherwise like to be a co-owner in any given project. Our utilities are for single buildings at a time only. We also provide district style heating and cooling utilities, and we also provide multi-phase approach. Next. So this is a summary of what you have already heard, but in effect, what are we talking about over here? We're saying future-proof your buildings. Everybody knows this is coming. Some jurisdictions, such as New York City, for example, are adopting far more draconian, call it stick-based measures to ensure folks are getting off of natural gas and going green. Toronto Green Standard, less draconian, but at the same time encouraging the right sort of things. You heard from David talking about how the city, Toronto, is being a leader in this respect and encouraging folks to have further incentives from a building operator, from a gross floor area as a developer, further incentives to go green in this respect. But we're really talking about either adding additional GFA or maximizing that rooftop amenity space. We are talking about perhaps the only thing that is, if you can call it this, a silver bullet when it comes to achieving net zero in your building. And that is to completely get off of natural gas and to use geothermal heating and cooling to provide those necessary creature comforts in your buildings. And we take away all objections associated with it. No upfront costs, and the ongoing cost is marked to below standard conventional utility rates. Next. Last but not least, a quick note on this. Geothermal does qualify for LEED. As many folks are continuing to pursue LEED, it is important to note that geothermal will offer up to 18 points for any given project. Now, just to wrap this up, I would like to now move on to questions and answers. So we're gonna unmute all of the hosts right now. I'm going to go ahead and continue to moderate this. But we have 9 questions right now. Please continue to pose your questions. I'm going to try my best to go through all of them. Ask them in any which way you want. And if you have follow-on questions, please continue to post. So without further ado, we'll start with a question for David. As an unregulated energy source who resourced and provided the trunk sewer map. The question is from John Eisberg. I assume the different colors provided the optimal locations for the technology. David, this is in reference to the map you had shown. So in other words, the question is who provided that sewer map? Who resourced it? Was it an unregulated source that did so? Did the city itself do so? And are the colors on that map, as one would be able to see on the website, are they the optimal locations, or what does that represent?
So we did all the work internally. Of course, we hired consultants with expertise in this kind of modeling, but the city did the work to essentially create the website. It was our data. Toronto Water has that information. Some of it is modeled, some of it is measured information, so it's a combination of both. But yeah, we made the website, and what you see there is that's actually the amount of heat that's available. So the darker reds, more heat. So in a sense, it does show ideal locations. However, it doesn't show just construction logistics, right? Like you may be right next door to a large trunk sewer, might be very difficult to access for a number of reasons. So it really is a first step. It's a screening tool, and on the website it looks slightly different, but essentially what you can do is plug in your address, find out how close you are to a nearby manhole, and then submit that to us. We'll give you the full data set, and then you can look at it more closely to decide if there's a viable project or not. And maybe I'll just say, because we're talking about Geo-exchange, we haven't done this for Geo-exchange because our assumption, and maybe Kareem, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you can pretty much do it anywhere in Toronto. We don't have these unique circumstances like in Guelph with certain water table limits, or in the city of Ottawa where like half of it's on, very shallow rock. There are challenges that Toronto necessarily doesn't have. So we've just we're leaving it to the industry to decide where it's best to put it.
No, that's absolutely right. And thank you for that, David. I think that pretty much sums the question up, and appreciate the insight in that regard. I got another one for you. This is a really interesting one, and this is probably the most hot button of the entire topic, the most hot button issue, that is. So I'm going to read the question as is, and I'm just going to summarize it for everyone's sake. Questions from Brian Moore. Why address the issue on a site-by-site basis? That adds risk to development, risk that it might not be approved. Why not add a provision to the parent zoning, which allows the permitted MPH area to be converted to other uses if a geothermal or alternative system is implemented? This can be secured through a boilerplate agreement as a function of SPA. Doing this de-risks the program and provides a clear incentive to development. So just before you jump on this, David, just to summarize, what I believe Ryan's getting at, and this is a very good point, is there any intention of the city to perhaps update its bylaws to make this a blanket approach when it comes to geothermal or similar measures? Or will this continue to be treated on a case-by-case basis?
For now, it's going to be case by case. There is a scenario where we put it into the parent zoning bylaw. The reason we haven't done it yet, we had applicants that were coming forward, and it was fairly late in the process where they sort of decided they wanted to pursue Geo-exchange and repurpose the Penthouse space. The process to amend the parent zoning bylaw would not have sort of met their timelines. We would have missed the opportunity to establish a precedent, which in my opinion was more important. And frankly, it's just how we work, where we go from the project out. So we get that precedent, we show that it works, it makes sense. Then we develop what you could call the program around that. In this case, the program might be amendments to the parent zoning bylaw in the future. Like I said, though, it can take quite a long time because you have to do public consultation. There are a lot of moving parts that need to be addressed. Obviously, it has to go to council on the whole, and you never know what you might get when you open it up to a lot of feedback. And so, again, we may do that. The other issue is you lose flexibility to make changes in the future. So I definitely see your point of view in terms of minimizing risk. This is our approach. The middle ground is to create a template that all the planners have, that we give to you at a planning application consultation. So the PAC meetings early on, it's available, and we get the planners buy-in early to minimize any risk that they may not approve it. But we have not seen that so far. Once we've established a precedent, every application that comes in that I've seen, the planners are amenable to it. So something definitely we'll keep looking at going forward in terms of how it's performing.
That's a great answer, David. Can I maybe ask a follow-on question that I was thinking of as you were answering it? It sounds like what you're saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that from your perspective, there is minimal risk since precedent has been set. But can you perhaps, just for the sake of myself and the audience, can you perhaps give us a scenario that perhaps you can think of that would get rejected? Like, is there a scenario in your mind where a developer goes ahead and applies, says they want to include geothermal in their building, and for whatever reason the additional floor space gets rejected? Is that something that you can think of? Is there a scenario that perhaps you could share with?
It's possible, right? Because I mean, look, our pitch to colleagues is that the height is not changing, the massing is not changing. But if you think about it, it is additional density, as small as that is, right? And density can sometimes be a triggering word for, the public when they're reviewing applications, right? Or sorry, when they're sort of being consulted. This could be perceived as just an issue, and ultimately any rezoning is approved by committee and council and the local councillor, and there is a possibility that there may not be an appetite for this. I'm highly skeptical of that, but you asked if there's any possibilities. That's one. Then there are just other issues, that something like flight paths, right? Those cap your height. So you could not, that mechanical floor is fine, but if you wanted to repurpose that, you can't, because then it counts as an additional story and you probably run into an issue with flight paths. So there are, but that's not a rejection per se. Like, it's just a fact of where your application is located. And frankly, like, this is part of the value proposition. There are other reasons to do Geo-exchange anyways, but yeah, if there's a scenario where you can't do it because of a flight path, it's just unfortunate circumstance.
Understood. Thank you for that. That's very helpful. Something that you mentioned during the process by which to get this approved, it seems like a building, any given development will submit their drawings, their application process, their application, if you will, for approval. Once that's approved, it seems that if they were considering to go geothermal, that they would then go ahead and submit a revision to that, which would then be considered to allow additional rooftop space, additional GFA. My question is, do they all, like, let's say a development knows out of the gate that it wants to go geothermal before it has submitted its application? Does it still have to go through this process of first kind of submitting it without the geothermal involved, and then come back afterwards and then submit one with the geothermal? Like, I'm a little bit confused as to if they know out of the gate as opposed to after the fact that they want to go geothermal, how would that be treated?
No, that's fine. Yeah, that's totally fine. The reason we put it in that, so that process is not like you must do these things. That's just sort of what we've seen, which is that at a first rezoning submission, which is very early on, there's not even enough information to decide, kind of what path they're taking. And so typically what we mean by that process is, feel free to submit it as conventional and then come back later once you've decided to go geo. But to your point, if you've already decided, yeah, come in with, how you want it to look ultimately. After that, the process is the same. Like, that's totally fine.
Okay, understood.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of questions that I believe are related. I'm going to read both of them. The first one is from Vito. The next one is a follow-up from Ryan. How will this work on a site that already holds OPA and ZBA approvals? And the question from Ryan is, for projects which do not require rezoning and are as of right, this approach requires a ZBA. So I believe these two are related. David, can you maybe run with them?
Yeah, I think in the scenario where you already have zoning in place, then you would go for a minor variance to try and get this, which, it's another process and nobody wants to go to committee of adjustment. But that's kind of where you're left if you already have your zoning. I mean, unless you want to reopen zoning, which I highly doubt. So you would go for a minor variance if it's important to you. In other, I'm not the zoning expert, and so I don't want to speak out of turn, but what I'll say, if you have specific circumstances where you think this approach might not work, like, we're happy to walk through it with you, like on a specific example. I just don't want to give you the wrong sort of, it's not my place to give advice. I wouldn't be the planner on the file. But yeah, in the first case, what we've seen is applicants will propose a minor variance to get that additional floor space.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I have a few questions that seem to be to Subterra itself. So I'm going to read these questions out and summarize them. I'm trying to group them together so that we can attack or I can answer several of them at the same time. So if I don't get to your question, please continue to post in the Q&A. Do you work, the questions from Edwin, do you work all over Canada? I'm thinking about how it might work in more remote areas. So with respect to Subterra's offering, we do work all over Canada. Remote areas do not pose a problem or a risk to us, especially those areas, for example, that do not have natural gas lines available. As long as there is electricity at the site for us to run our pumps and the heat exchanger, we can go ahead and deliver heating and cooling pretty much anywhere. It's important to note that the Earth at these depths is 55 degrees Fahrenheit pole to pole. So it's just a question of how are we going to approach the modeling of it, and how are we going to balance out the heating and cooling loads? And that is all. There's always a solution to that. It just comes down to the design of the geothermal field itself. There's another question which I believe is for Subterra, which is, what are the common perceived barriers to entry for developers not using Geo-exch? From our perspective, from Subterra's perspective, the barrier to entry is typically the cost. It is very expensive. I mean, it is 2 to 3 times more expensive than conventional heating and cooling. Another barrier is the ongoing risk of operating it. Some folks that have taken upon themselves to purchase geothermal heating and cooling systems for their building, as a design build, for example, may not have engaged the correct folks to operate it on a term basis. That's not our offering, by the way. Our offering is only to do the utility model. That said, if you do not operate the system, more importantly, if you do not balance the system correctly, it will fail at some point. It's a very slow moving car crash, but it does crash. And that is also a major barrier to entry, because that is typically when folks hear of quote unquote horror stories related to geothermal heating and cooling. There's a question, David, regarding what it is that we want, regarding some of the websites that you had shared earlier. That you've already mentioned that in the slides, but do you mind, maybe for the sake of the folks asking the question, can you reference those websites again?
Sure. I can also go and put it in the. I can answer the question, but yeah, if you through Google or whatever browser you use, search engine you use, you can just search for wastewater energy program, City of Toronto. It'll take you to a specific web page for that, and there'll be a link there to the map. We'll be updating our website periodically, but yeah, it's if wastewater and energy Toronto, you'll find it.
Wonderful, thank you. The question from Shrish to Subterra: what survey do you undertake to identify geothermal source at a location? We provide all of the services necessary for identifying the thermal conductivity and the ease of drilling at any given location. We do that by drilling a test borehole and by performing a thermal conductivity test. That's part of our standard offering, and that's always included in our proposals and in our utility model. That said, of course, due to experience, we have a very good idea coast to coast where this is great, where there's a great amount of thermal conductivity and where there is less so, and ultimately how it is that we design around that to still present a solution. There are some questions regarding retrofits in general, like what would happen to existing buildings, or if there is a retrofit that's possible for multi-unit residential. This is a very interesting question, because we are currently undertaking retrofit projects mostly in New York, to be honest, and in Manhattan area, because of some of the because of local law 97 in New York City. But we're also looking at retrofits here in Ontario as well. It's important to note that every single retrofit opportunity, every building will be unique. The question is not just about drilling. We do have low headroom rigs that we can bring into underground parking levels or into basements. If there is green space or at grade parking space around the building, we can drill from there typically. But it is a bigger question than simply putting the holes into the ground, if you will. The question typically is the HVAC, the HVAC component of the building, the system for the circulation of heating and cooling, can it be adapted to geothermal, or is there greater work involved in that? No simple answer. Every single building is unique. So I would encourage folks that want to look at this on a retrofit basis, whether it's here in Ontario or elsewhere, to reach out to us so that one of our experts can perform a site visit free of charge and put forward a feasibility study. Aidan Sweetie has a couple of, regarding your question, is accessing the City of Toronto's wastewater heat map, like the City of Toronto, becoming is it for the energy as a service provider, or is it free to use? So I'm going to answer this, David, but correct me if I'm wrong. It's free to use. Anyone can access that.
That's right. Yeah.
The other question is Subterra only providing geothermal energy as a solution, geothermal utility solutions, or also solar, wastewater? Does wastewater heat recovery unlock even more penthouse space? So regarding the second half of that question, I will leave that to both David and Hanieh to answer. Regarding the first part, we are primarily a geothermal heating and cooling company. However, we do have quite a few projects in which we are taking on additional measures in the building, such as the heat pumps, such as subcirculation, such as solar, such as batteries. We have done this in certain projects, mostly in the US, less so in Canada, but it is part of our offering. Wastewater as well. We actually have a strategic relationship with Shark, provider of wastewater energy recovery systems. And we do regularly include that in our offering for those solutions where it makes sense. Now, the question to David and Hanieh, does wastewater heat recovery unlock even more penthouse space?
It might. It really there's a lot of variables. You know, how much heat is available in the trunk sewer? How much heat can you reject to it? Because you know, it really comes down to capacity available, the design of the building itself. But in terms of, I'm not an engineer, but in terms of first principles, you know, wastewater tends to be higher temperature than the earth. So in theory, yes, you can avoid more equipment, or you can shrink the minimal equipment that you might need left on the rooftop. But you know, it's hard to say conclusively. It really depends. Fortunately, that's the answer.
Thank you. Hanieh, from your perspective, I guess apart from the maybe the domestic hot water boiler no longer being needed, is there any additional benefit from going wastewater energy recovery?
The only thing that I can think of is just like the coordination might be a little bit easier than geothermal, because for the geothermal you would need more ongoing coordination with the team, especially during the excavation, and then also all the stuff that is happening in your parking. But maybe by going with water waste, it might be a little bit easier.
Thank you. I hope that answers that question. Regarding, there's a question that came at the end, that if there is a cost barrier, why would there be a cost barrier to developers of Subterra's financing and construction? I mean, great question from my perspective, but yeah, I guess the answer is there's a cost barrier if you are intending on owning it yourself. Of course, we take away that cost barrier because we don't sell the solution. We are the utility provider. There's a question from Bob Ho. We are piloting Geo-exch on our project. We're considering a Geo-exch advisor, since they are the ownership group. Does Subterra provide this service, or aware of organizations that provide this service? We do not actually provide that service. We are beyond, like for those projects where we are the utility, we do all of that in-house, but we do not currently provide services for folks that would look to do design build or own it themselves. There are some firms that do that. Feel free to reach out to me separately, Bob, and I can guide you accordingly. There's a question. I'm pretty sure it's a question. It looks, there's definitely more statement in the beginning, but afterwards it's totally a question. I'm going to read it out as is, and this is from Christopher Dunn. The City of Toronto is adopting a sequential planning application review process that requires a site-specific zoning bylaw to be in effect before a site plan application can be submitted. I need the level of detail and staff comments from site plan application in order to inform and understand the drafting of the zoning bylaw that incorporates what you are proposing. Why is the city's new planning application approach making this process and opportunity more difficult? David, I'm sorry, but this is you.
You know, again, like, I don't want to be that person that deflects, but like, it's really not for me to comment on the process that city planning is designed in largely in response to, I think, new provincial legislation. It's very new. I know that people are having different experiences with it. You know, to your specific point on, you know, you need certain details that only are available to you at site plan in order to get into your rezoning to repurpose penthouse space. That's not what we've seen. These have been projects where it's been during the rezoning period before a site plan application has been submitted. These are not concurrent submissions. The details you need, it's really about massing. It's really about space. So really, this is why you need to, anybody who's thinking about it, best to talk to a company like Subterra and get them to give you a back of the envelope sort of estimate about what geo would look like in that building, because that's enough detail really to come up with estimates for amount of GFA you might need, both in terms of what you might gain or what you might need to accommodate the geo system, things like that. Everything else, like, they are estimates, but that's why zoning is crafted to have sort of a range, right? You're usually capped and then there's a minimum, and somewhere within that range it's usually correct. But like if you're seeing where you need certain details at SPA that essentially, if you're seeing that you're not able to do this, please let us know, because that doesn't align with what we've seen so far.
Thanks, David. Here's another question, I think mostly aimed at you, and I'm going to expand upon this question because I think it's a really good one. This is from Aidan Sweeney. Is it free to use the heat provided from the sewer systems, or is the city selling the heat? And David, before you answer that, I think perhaps assuming that you have knowledge on this, it'd be great if you could expand upon under what circumstances would the city be willing to allow a developer to implement a waste energy conversion, a waste energy system by utilizing the city's sewer lines as opposed to simply the building's affluent rejection?
Yeah, so first question, yes, we do charge for thermal energy from our sewers. It's a nominal fee, but there are currently rules in place that prevent us from providing it for free. Those rules potentially could be waived, I think, by council decision, but right now, our base assumption is that we will be charging a nominal fee for the thermal energy. Yes, like we are currently accepting inquiries for thermal wastewater energy projects outside the building. Absolutely. The technology we're focused on right now is what you might call side stream or offline. The idea of you have a wet well and you're just tying in with sort of two pipes with isolation valves to the trunk. We're not talking about inline systems yet, which there's some nuance there because anything that goes in the sewer is a different consideration for Toronto Water in terms of maintenance and operations. Bottom line is, if you have a project in mind where you want to do wastewater, by all means come to us. If you want to do it inside the building, absolutely. There's nothing for us to do in terms of additional approvals. But yeah, outside the building, especially if it involves city land, you most likely have to access the right of way. So we will be involved in those, but we are accepting applications.
Beyond GFA, what is the additional benefit for developers to go geothermal with Subterra, for example? When going, our offering for going geothermal heating and cooling to any given new development is to ultimately avoid the cost that the developer otherwise would have had to spend on heating and cooling, conventional heating and cooling equipment. So that's important to note that whatever it is that you had budgeted for that, you are no longer spending. The additional GFA is a great cherry on top. We're also ensuring that from the utility perspective, from the geothermal heating and cooling utility perspective, that the ongoing cost of the heating and cooling services are marked below utility rates, conventional utility rates. So what you otherwise would have used had you had a chiller and a boiler and a cooling tower, for example. Now, on that note, if this is a condominium, this is important to make sure that the condominium is still sellable and to ensure that the residents have comfort and know that they have value. If this is an apartment, it is also to ensure that your operating costs are kept low and that you have a meaningful, experienced operator to ensure that your building will not be at risk in the middle of the winter, for example. These are some of the greatest benefits to going green, to geothermal, not least of which is to avoid the very expensive carbon tax, which is going to triple in price by 2030, that you'll no longer be exposed to. So there are many benefits to going geothermal. It's not just adding additional space at the top of your building or avoiding having to build, for example, a mechanical penthouse. So it's not just cost savings or avoided costs. It's also removing exposure to carbon taxes and to other measures that are coming down the pipe. And it's also to ensure that on an operating cost basis, again, whether it's a condominium or an apartment or an office tower for that matter, it doesn't really matter, to ensure that on an operating cost basis that you are below what you otherwise would have been had it been conventional heating and cooling. There's a question that just came in. What is the minimum economic feasible capacity for waste heating recovery? That's a great question, Antonio. I would recommend that you reach out to us or to Shark, for example, or any other waste heating recovery service provider. Our team can help you guide you through that. There are options available. So, for example, for Shark, their larger system is meant to connect to city sewers or something of that magnitude. They do have a smaller product that could be building by building, which is called Piranha, which is appreciably smaller and can be properly utilized in most mid-rise and greater developments. But to all who attended, thank you very much. Special thank you to Hanieh and David, our star panelists. Very wonderful information that was shared. Thank you very much for your time and your effort in putting that together. Please have a wonderful remainder of the day, and thank you very much for joining us. Goodbye.